So this is the difference between Republicans and Democrats. A woman in a hot air balloon is lost. So she shouts to a man below, "Excuse me, I promised a friend I would meet him, but I don't know where I am." You're 31 degrees north, 14.57 minutes north latitude, and 100 degrees, 49.09 minutes west longitude, he replies. "Oh, you must be a Democrat." I am. How did you know? "Because everything you told me is logically correct, but the information is useless. I am still lost, and frankly, you've been no help." "Well, you must be a Republican," he says to her. "Well, yes, I am. How did you know?" "Well, you've risen to where you are doing a lot of hot air. You made a promise you couldn't keep. You expect me to solve your problems. You're exactly the same place you were before we met, but somehow now it's my fault." It's my fault now. All right, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, lend me your ears. I don't know about you, but it has become difficult to turn on the news. Read, listen, watch. It seems like we don't go through one day without some sort of news about violence attacks, whether it's of terrorism origin or whether it's some crazy person with a gun or that guy with the hammer. Did you hear about that guy with the hammer? It seems like the news media is even hyper vigilant. Every little news thing, every little violent act that seems to be happening in the world is coming at us at 100 miles an hour. And like I say, I don't know about you, but I'm almost wanting to just turn it all off and put my head under the sand and just say, let it go. And you know what? I use some spiritual principle to do that. See if you don't hear yourself in some of these. I've written some of the ones that I might say to myself when I get overwhelmed with the difficult news of the day. Well, what world? Isn't the world supposed to be an illusion? Isn't this all a dream? Seek not to change the world. Don't make error real. Huh? Thinking the world needs saving is just your judgment. It's all perfect. It's all good. It's all good. It's just what it is. It's just what it is. Even Hitler was doing his part of the plan. I need do nothing but be. Salvation is inevitable. So why worry about it? Hey, don't worry about it. The journey is already over. And we can sit comfortably upon our truth, cross our arms, take a nice cold drink, and not worry about anything. The problem is the world is calling us, and we're in the world. And each of us hear the call to step up in some way. But the question is, how, where, why, what, right? You struggle with this because we believe in our truth. We're very happy with the truth that we are seeking to embody. Love is the only power, right? Forgiveness, peace begins with me and extends to the world. We love those truths. We want to stand upon our truth, and yet we also want to do something in the name of freedom. And I say freedom because we want freedom from the isms, the racisms, the age-isms, all of the isms, all the senses of separation. We want freedom from global warming and environmental challenges. So we want to do something in the name of freedom. And as I put those two together, I realized that there was a dynamic between truth and freedom. And that's where I'd like to start today. Actually, I'm going to hang the talk on 3 ideas, which are basic. The Supreme Court actually caught on to this idea, this dynamic between truth and freedom. Listen to what they said in 1992 ruling, U.S. Supreme Court. The heart of liberty is to define one's own concept of existence, of the meaning of the universe. That is liberty. You get to define the meaning of the universe. Very deep. And what they're joining there is truth and freedom. So what I'd like to talk about today is that truth is a lot more important than you'd think, that freedom is a lot more complex than what you'd think, and that spirituality is more liberating than you think. So let us begin with the first idea, that truth is important. Freedom comes from truth, but it's not exactly the way we conceive of it. In reality, what we need to understand is that truth limits freedom. I'd like to give you an example, but first let me tell you something about a philosopher called Michel Foucault, 20th century Foucault. He comes from the Nietzsche tradition of philosophy. And he said the following, kind of a famous statement of his. He's talking about, this is a paper that he wrote entitled Truth and Power. And he said, the important thing here, I believe, is that truth isn't outside of power or lacking in power. Truth isn't the reward of free spirits, the child of protracted solitude, nor the privilege of those who have succeeded in liberating themselves. He says, truth is a thing of this world. It is produced only by virtue of multiple forms of constraint, and it includes regular effects of power. It includes regular effects of power. What he's saying essentially is that when you make a truth statement or a truth claim, that it is really a power play. What you're wanting to do is establish your truth over somebody's. You want some power over, because yours is the truth. Now take a deep breath here, because normally we talk about truth in such a, holistic oneness kind of way. But here Foucault is putting something in our face that's a little difficult to swallow. He's saying it's a power play. He's saying it's something that we do to sort of one-upmanship on somebody. Let me give you an example. Let's suppose that somebody here says, everybody should support social justice. Right? Somebody stands up, that's my truth. Everybody ought to promote social justice. Right? Foucault would say, let's see. Do you want to promote social justice because you love justice so much? Or because you want to promote some kind of social revolution in which you're going to be the leader? And so you're going to have power over the people as to what social justice is all about. Somebody stands up and says, I believe that everybody should follow, should obey God's word. Everybody should obey God's word. Foucault would say, why do you say that? Is it because you love God so much? Or is it because you want some kind of revolution so that you can tell people to obey God's word and insist on that? Do you catch the meaning here? So Foucault is telling us that when we have a truth claim, it's really a power play. Interestingly, Jesus, when he spoke to the Pharisees were the Jews who were very much in charge of keeping to the letter of the law. He was criticizing them with the same thing. He was saying, you guys are all in charge of the letter of the law. Why? To keep yourselves in power, to keep yourself above people, because you want to be seen as the great almighties around here. You are, you're brutal vipers. You're hypocrites. He laid into them. You're missing out the point. It's not the letter of the law, it's the spirit of the law, says Jesus. So, if you got Jesus and Foucault in the same camp, you got a pretty strong camp there. Right? So, we really need to take this in. Now, having said all of that, there is something about the truth that we know. And I think what we need to, as we think about spiritual activism, what it is we're going to do, how we're going to do it, upon what truth we're going to stand. We need to be very clear as to not just what is the claim, but what are we putting a claim in? I think the questions from Foucault are very good. Are you standing upon this because you believe that you want power over? You want to be seen as more intelligent, having a higher truth? Is there any ego involved in that truth stand? Or is it really intended to raise the consciousness of all? What is in the truth claim? What is it pointing towards? What is it asking for? That's a very good question for us to consider as we move forth, because truth claims can be used to destroy freedom, as I've explained, but not necessarily. They can be used to also hold on to our freedoms. And you remember that Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." And that was a very deep statement. And of course, he meant that, because it is when we come into absolute truth that we can find a way to our freedom. So in this way, you see how important truth is. There can be no freedom without truth, is basically what Jesus is saying. And this is why truth is important. Well, if truth is important, then freedom is a little more complex than we might think. If we were just to ask anybody, what's your concept of freedom? Well, freedom is no restrictions. I get to do anything I want. I am free. Not true. Not true. There's a relationship between restrictions and freedom that is very important to notice. We need to be willing sometimes to surrender our freedom in order to find a greater freedom or liberation. Let me give you an example. As I'm getting older, I'm getting more sensitive to the foods that I eat. As a young person, anything that I could masticate was good, right? Now I'm a little bit more aware of the balance between proteins and carbohydrates, right? All this stuff, whether it's organic or not, the water that I'm drinking, right? What kind of water is it? I'm more concerned about that. So what I'm doing is I'm restricting more the kind of foods that I eat. And you might say, oh, well, you're putting yourself in jail. You don't have freedom in your diet. You should be free. Well, I've been sort of free, And here's the testimony of it, right? So a little more restriction would do me good. Why? Because I want the greater freedom of good health, long life, agile body, energy, a greater freedom through restriction, through being careful about what I eat, right? Let's suppose you're a musician, right? And you take up an instrument. You know what that means. You got to practice. So that means while some of your friends are going to the movies, or they're having parties, or they're doing things, you're sitting at home, strumming your guitar, playing your trumpet, writing your concert, whatever it is. You're saying, no, I don't want the freedom of going and have that fun, because I'm restricting myself to this. I found something that I enjoy, that I love, and I'm going to restrict that freedom, because what I want is the freedom through music. And those of you who are musicians know that after you've dominated some of the mechanics of your instrument, you get into a place where the music transcends you, right? And you find a greater freedom because you've restricted your freedom. Do you see this? So freedom is complex. And it is not just a release of restrictions, not at all. And so we, in this understanding, we have to ask ourselves, well, who were we created to be? We need to find the freedom that is relational to who we are. The musician finds their medium to their freedom. And maybe as you consider spiritual activism, that's your question. Well, what is my nature? What is my being? What am I being called to? What freedom is mine to sustain, to promote, to be? Important question. Is a fish on some grass free? No. A fish on grass is dying. But you put fish in its environment. You put fish in the water, right? Finds freedom. So it tells us something about our nature, about who we are, the environment in which we need to find ourselves in. And let's talk about love. I was one of those young men who made a bold declaration: I will never get married. I'm on my third marriage now, right? I remember early in my first marriage, right? I was going to be, just been married recently, just going to be coming home, and decided to take a little detour. I don't know what, cup of coffee or something, right? And came home later than usual. She says, "Where have you been?" Before cell phones and all that, right? So it dawned on me, I am no longer free to go get a cup of coffee unless I call somebody and tell them. Here I thought I'd left my parents' house, right? Now I'm in a new sort of jail. So we accept coming into a committed relationship, and it puts limits, it restricts us. And yet, what do we find in that love? There's a line in the marriage ceremony that we shared here with Troy and Manuel. We find our liberation through the communion of our two souls in a committed relationship. Two souls come together in a love relationship, and we transcend any sense of self. We touch the divine, right? We're free. And if we can do it with one person, then we can open our heart and be free in our relationships through the freedom that unconditional love offers us. But we need to restrict it first. So freedom is complex. Now, if that's true for a love relationship, what does that take us into the concept, the greater concept of divine love? This is why the third point today, spirituality is more liberating than we think. Spirituality is more liberating than we think. There's a movie called I, Robot. There's a book and then there's a movie. In the movie, Will Smith plays Detective Snoop, what is it? Spooner. Oh, my man, save me. Detective Spooner, right? And the robot's name is Sonny. That one I did remember. Okay. And so Sonny has been created with a purpose. There was going to be a robot uprising. The robot's going to take over the world. But Sonny's been created to fight that revolution, right? And so at the end of the movie, he and Will Smith are successful in quashing the robot rebellion. At the end of the movie, poignant moment, Sonny says to the detective, he says, well, I was created with a purpose to squash this revolution. Now that's done. Now I don't know what to do. I don't have a purpose. And the detective answers him. He says, well, Sonny, you're just going to have to live this through like the rest of us. He says, that is freedom. And in that line, we have ourselves. We didn't come in with a specific, guidebook. Nobody programmed us that we're going to stand for abused animals or children or food or the planet. We have the freedom to decide what gives us meaning and purpose. And this is very important for how we're going to show up in the world and where we're going to show up with spiritual activism. What is ours to do, right? And so we consider this idea of where will our purpose then come from? Let me take this to the level of oneness. In the book of John, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, some translations say, in the beginning was the Logos. They substitute word for Logos. Logos is a beautiful word. It's a little complicated, but for our purposes today, let's just look at it as reason. Really, Logos points to the reason for living. Let's just substitute the word Logos for reason as we listen to what John said. In the beginning was reason. Reason for life. And the reason was God. And the reason was with God. So they're telling us, John is telling us, that there's a reason, there's a purpose, and it's somehow joined to the God essence that we are. And in a very powerful mission statement, Jesus says in the Bible, I have come, he says. He's given you his purpose. I have come that you may have life and have it in abundance. He makes that statement. That's his mission statement. That's his purpose. That's his spiritual activism. And if we just sort of expand that idea a little bit, just expand it a little bit, he's talking about salvation. Salvation from pain, from suffering, from smallness. I came that you may have life and have it in abundance. He's talking about freedom. Now, if we take Jesus' call, we can write our own mission statement, obviously. But our mission statement needs to have the same kind of quality, the same kind of energy. Needs to point to some kind of salvation. So if you were to say your own mission statement, why are you here? What is your purpose? What are you called to do? It needs to point towards some kind of salvation, some sort of abundance in life, some sort of meaning that reflects the true nature of who you are, you see. And so once again, it's calling us to a deeper knowing about ourselves. In the beginning was the Word, was the Logos, was the reason. And the reason was with God, right here. And the reason was, or let's say is, God. Right here. Right within us. God and I are one. So what are we saying? How are we going to flex our spiritual activism muscle? Well, there's a danger to just sit and meditate and work on yourselves until you really come into the full realization of your oneness. I think that's a trap that I tend to fall into. I want to retreat into my secret prayer room and know my oneness. Great work. But we can't wait until that whole oneness consciousness is duly established. We are called to act now. And so I ask you to listen to the cries of the world and see which one touches your heart. And there are people in this room who have already responded. I know that Kay listened to the call of pets and dogs and animals. And others of you are stepping forward in the form of the environment and the homeless and the helpless and the children. You've made that declaration. You're standing upon your truth there. You're called to hear that call. And then, when you hear it, remember this dynamic between truth and freedom. What is going to be your truth claim? What is going to be the nature of it? How are you going to express it? Are you going to be against something, or are you going to be in favor of something? You know, the United States was one of the few countries that didn't sign the Paris Accord on global warming. So if you choose to act in that capacity, what is going to be your message? Are you going to criticize those who didn't sign it? You going to be angry about that, or are you going to speak in favor of care for the planet? Are you going to model your life with recycling and doing the things that you need to do to reduce your own carbon imprint? How are you going to live that activism out? Because that which you're putting into the system, that which you're giving in, is going to create the environment. So if you're putting in negativity, if you're judging, if you're condemning, if you're naysaying, if you're pointing out how everything is wrong and bad, that's not really pointing to the ultimate truth that you want, the freedom that you're seeking. So we want to stand upon our truth. We can't wait for the full realization of oneness consciousness. We're called to act now, but we do so consciously. We go into our heart. We say, what is the truth here? What am I called to do? Is this something that's pulling my heart? Is this something where I feel I need to act? Well, what could I do to really stand upon this truth and let the fullness of my light and my love and the being that who I am in God show forth in this situation? What's the most positive, constructive thing that I could do? And be guided, whether it's writing a letter or acting in some appropriate way. We show up, we act, and we do. There's a quote here that I found that I like very much. First of all, Martin Luther King Jr. said, faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase. So maybe you don't know how to take on, all of climate change in the world. Faith is just taking one step, the first step for you. Positively aligned to your truth. But I like this quote. He says, spiritual activism is the pursuit of service for the good of all, not for the advancement or benefit of individuals or selected communities. The mindset behind your actions is noble, holistic, universal. Be mindful that the ego and self-service have no place in spiritual activism. It's kind of like Foucault. Are you stating your truth claim so that you can be one up over everybody? Or is it somehow calling everybody to consciousness? He does say, however, spiritual activism is all about self-serving with a capital S, self, the greater self. It serves your highest self, not your ego. It is a pathway to true and deep happiness as opposed to temporary and unstable happiness of the ego. Gives us some clues as to how we're going to show up. So we hear the call. We want to respond, but we want to respond from the highest point of view. Not from the ego, not from a power play. We want freedom, and we want it to stand upon the truth that we know, but we want it to be as powerful a declaration as we can. And this quote I found from Greg Mackey. Greg is a writer for the Course in Miracles, and he wrote this little poem which fits perfectly our message today. He says, and also Linda's poem, time winds on wearily, and the world is very tired now. It is old and worn and without hope. Time with its illusion of change and death wears out the world and all things in it. He says, let me look about the world and see the suffering there. Is not my heart willing to bring my weary brothers rest? That's the plan for salvation, God's plan for salvation for you, to bring your brothers and sisters rest. He says, then let me not withhold salvation longer. Let me not hold back. Let me show up. Let me stand up. Let me write. Let me speak. Let me do in behalf of them. Let me take my part in God's plan for salvation. He says, Spirit is making that plan perfectly explicit to me. It's calling from your heart. You know which ones are yours. You know which ones you really are excited about. And is also telling me my part in it and how urgent it is to fulfill it. I must do what is allotted to me. For on my part does all the plan depend. And God's Son has such a great need for my willingness to do this part that I cannot conceive of a need that is greater. Let me remember that doing my part does not call me to sacrifice my own best interests on behalf of truth. It does not force me to sacrifice my own happiness. Instead, it is the only way to find my own happiness. For only by saving my brothers will I be saved. Futility of function not fulfilled will haunt me while my brothers lie asleep, till what has been assigned for me is done. Every minute and every second gives me a chance to save myself through saving my brothers. We talk about salvation of the world, but it's really ourselves that we're saving. Let me not lose these chances, not because they will not return, but because the delay of joy is needless. The delay of joy is needless. In other words, there's joy, there's fulfillment, there's purpose, there's freedom in spiritual activism. So I'm calling you today, ladies and gentlemen, if you've sat on the couch, perhaps hearing the news, shaking your head, feeling sad, angry, take a moment, turn off the TV, listen to your heart. Is there a call there? Are your brothers and sisters calling you towards some sort of freedom? You can hear it in your heart. And if you can hear it, then be willing to sit with it. Sit with it enough to hear the truth behind it. What is the truth that you know, that you want to see manifested in this world? How can you show up as that truth? Know what is yours to do in this, however small or large. And then take action, however small or large. All it takes is one step. We do it on behalf of ourselves. We do it on behalf of our brothers and sisters. And we remember that it's always a process, that it begins, and maybe we don't arrive exactly at the goal, but it's more important, the goal is less important than the action. The action is going to give us that joy, that freedom, that release. If we live the change that we want to see, then we can't lose. We've already won. Truth is important. Freedom is complex. And spirituality is absolutely liberating. Amen.